Uh, Go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and joining me today is a very good friend from the past who is making her official debut. Even though she was on Anchor many years ago, she is now making her official debut here on the channel.
Mhm.
She is a current author of fantasy and erotic fiction, and she has previously worked as a game writer and narrative designer, a teller of tales, and repository of knowledge, mostly about the golden age of piracy. She strives to create stories you can't look away from. So, without further ado, I turn over to my good friend and fellow writer, Rachel Reeves. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Gabe. It's been lovely to be back.
Awesome, awesome, Rachel. So, as a little quick icebreaker, so you are an author of fantasy and erotic fiction, but do you have any current works that you would like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Well, actually, I have a current erotic work that I have published on Inkit that I am expanding onto a full book. So right now, the snippet that is available in my current profile is about 10,000 words, and I'm working to create a whole story based on that snippet. So that's what I'm currently chipping away at.
Nice. Now, as a little teaser, I know you don't want to give too many spoilers away, but what can you tell us as like the general idea?
Well, so if you read my previous work, and that's okay, not many did. Um, it's a story about a woman who is a graduate student. She is in contact with the Fae unknowingly, and the cute graduate uh, graduate assistant that works for her father, excuse me, uh, finds out that she is searching around the Fae, and he's had a past with them. Um, and so they have to work together to keep the Fae from finding out about her and unraveling more of their secrets. It's an erotic fiction, and you find out some truths about the um the graduate assistant, whose name is Ryan, and we will have to see if they end up together or if they will fall into the Feywild and never leave.
Ooh, nice. I absolutely love it. Now, for many of you who are wondering how me and Rachel know each other, now we were students who were part of a study abroad program back in, I want to say 2016,
Mhm.
2017. I could be wrong. I think 2016 was it?
It was late 2016 and early 2017. It was about 6 months.
Yes, that is correct. And we studied abroad in Chengdu, China. And since that, we've been, best friends ever since. And honestly, we love exactly the same thing. And it was, a match made, friendship born. And we always stay up to date with each other's works in progress. And I'm just very curious, Rachel, how did this passion for writing come about? Because I think you may have mentioned it when we were back studying abroad, but I don't think I think you maybe told me like a little bit, but like how did this passion for writing really come about?
Well, Gabe, as you know, but our listeners may not know, I am physically disabled. I
Mm,
have cerebral palsy, so getting around was always a struggle for me.
hmm.
And so, where better to escape and to go places that you will never be able to reach than in the written word?
Yes.
I was always a voracious reader. I remember locking myself in our little playroom that we had at my house and just reading every book on the shelf for hours. Um, I would lose myself to the written word. Like if and I mean that literally. If you clapped your hand in front of me while I was reading, and this still happens today, I wouldn't look up, right? I wouldn't realize you were there until you like startled me. And so there's always been a love of reading. And out of that love of reading grew a love of writing. When
Mm.
I got older, especially when I became a high school student, I wanted to give to people what I had been given in my childhood with that written word. So that's why I became a writer.
Awesome. That is amazing. So now let's talk about the creation of this book of yours, which from the last time we spoke, does this book have a title or a working title?
I am hoping to see it as part of a duology, so it's going to be called the um the Cold Steel duology.
Ooh.
But the first book will be uh I have a few titles for it. Steel and Snow, or uh a twinkling flake. Something like
Ooh.
that. But yeah.
Nice. Very, very nice. So
Yeah.
when you began writing this book, what were the goals you had for yourself as the author, but also thinking of your future readers? What was your promise to them?
Well, I wanted them to have an experience that at the time, because I started this novel in 2021
Mm.
ish. Um this kind of concept was not super, it wasn't a genre yet. Romantasy really didn't exist as
Right.
much. I'm not on Book Talk, so I wasn't up on the trends, and I didn't realize that the wave would come. But still, I wanted to provide a story, and I still do, that is a little bit more vivid and toothsome, impactful in a way that those other novels were not for me personally.
Mm.
I also wanted to explore a more foreign side to the Fae. I'm basing these Fae on the Irish legends of the Fair Folk,
Right.
and so I wanted to incorporate that into it. Um, because no offense to any other writer in that genre, but romantasy strives to make their otherworldly creatures more human, more
Mm.
relatable, and I always found comfort and, I guess, zeal. It might not be the correct word for it. Comfort and, like, I was matching my wits against the ones that were more foreign and more
Mm.
otherworldly. I've always liked the old fairy tales that had been whitewashed by Disney or uh, by most concerned parents, but I'm here for the blood of the wolf and not, the happy ending. And
Right.
so I really tried to keep that feeling in mind when I was creating my fae.
Nice. And that's very fair. That is very true because there are, many stories that cover, the Fae or maybe some element of mythology that has been satirized, to put like for a better word, that has been like the standard. But sometimes we just want to go back to how these characters were presented, how they were depicted, because sometimes that's even more enticing, more interesting than trying to reinvent them. So as you began drafting this book, what was the reaction like from friends and family who learned that you were working on this?
Well, they treated it as a piece of erotic fiction, and unfortunately, erotic fiction is often devalued by a lot of at least male readers,
Mm.
because it is seen as base, like a penny novel, right?
Mm.
The cheap paperback, right? Harlequin. Um,
Ah.
and I saw it that way too after a few people had given me their feedback about it,
Mm.
but I decided to push on towards it. And for me, I care about my characters, and I know
Mhm.
that's such a basic thing. Although, if you tell me to kill my darlings, it's going to be quite a fight. But if I want to make them care, so I decided to pull back a little bit from my defensiveness.
Mm.
Um, and I started to rewrite some things. That's why I'm continuing this story that because it was just a piece of erotic fiction at the beginning, but now I hope that it has become something more. I'm not finished with it yet.
Mm.
I write slowly, or at least more slow than others. I know you can crank out a book like a typewriter, so but no, so by the time that it's done, I hope that it is, if not just erotica, it's also literature. I want to be
Mm.
erotic literature. And I hope, at least, my sincerest hope is that my readers believe that too.
Awesome. And that kind of leads into the next question, which is a very personal question, which is,
Mhm.
as writers and as authors, we always imprint a little bit of ourselves into our first works, especially our first works, because it's our baby. It's something that we've worked on for years and years. And I think especially now in today's digital age, when we look at, the publishing industry, it's a double-edged sword. On
Mhm.
one side, you have those that are like-minded, open to new ideas, as well as fellow authors who write similar things and readers who love that kind of genre and storytelling. On the other side of the coin, we do leave ourselves exposed to hate speech, trolls, spam, what have you, which is very detrimental to an author's mental health. And of
Mhm.
course, imposter syndrome is always going to be in back of everyone's mind. So, Rachel, when you began writing this back in the 2020, did you have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue going?
Well, I think every writer struggles with these. I don't think it's something that you can overcome as easily as you think. And it's more like a journey where these things might get to you when you're first starting out, but you'll still feel some of it later in your career. As
Right.
a first time writer and as someone who hasn't had a piece of long form fiction published, I do deal with imposter syndrome.
Mm,
But what has helped me to combat that feeling of not feeling like I'm good enough is just I have my own story to tell and no one else can tell it.
mm.
And if no one else writes my story, then it's never going to get seen and I want it to be seen, you know? I
Absolutely.
I don't want to deprive myself and my potential readers from experiencing that, you know?
Very true, 100%. And this kind of leads into another question, which I really want to ask you, which is, I've had a lot of guests on the show answer this question, which is, the last, like the 4 years, the lockdown years, the quarantine years, that was seen by some authors as like a golden age of independent creators, whether that's artistry, podcasting, music, and writing, what have you. And I've been asking my guests this to hear their thoughts on it. Some people say that we are in a new age. Some people say we aren't in a golden age. And some people say that there's too much of an influx of or too much influx of independent works that, well, yes, some have, that creative drive, but others were simply made just be out there. So for you, Rachel, writing during that period, just the same as me, do you feel that we are in a new age of independent authors?
See, I if you asked me this 2 years ago, I would have said yes, right?
Mm,
I do not mind work flooding in because you will find your niche.
right.
Someone will be writing, even if it's just one other person, right?
Mm,
And you should not be getting into this industry to make money. Like
mm,
uh for every um what's that series? A Court of Thorns and Roses. For every A
yes.
Court of Thorns and Roses, there are 10 others that never achieve that widespread critical acclaim. For me, I'm not in it for the money. Money would be nice, but it's a side benefit, really.
Right. Absolutely.
Ultimately, it's the reason why I published the first part of my novel on Inkjet. I want people to read what I wrote.
Absolutely, 100%. And Rachel, you hit a nail on the head that, the publishing industry, it's not an industry that's a get rich quick scheme. It is
Mhm.
very long, it's very, very tiresome, and sometimes it could be unrewarding in some regards if you go with the mindset of trying to be a writer full time. And that actually segues perfectly now into the business side of being an author, which I would like to hear your thoughts on, Rachel. So, as another icebreaker, when you began writing the initial draft of this duology, did you
Mm.
have an idea of your audience in mind? And in your opinion, when should a writer consider their audience? The drafting phase or the marketing phase?
I honestly believe that you should consider your audience after your first draft.
Mm,
Um, the first draft is for you. The second draft is for everyone that you want to read. In my experience with publishing short fiction, I wrote those pieces for me and they resonated with other people, right?
right.
But I never really considered an audience. And to me, considering an audience, I think it's fine. You don't have to. Because it also gives an enormous amount of pressure to yourself, right? If you're
Yes.
considering an audience, you're also thinking like, what will appeal to that audience? And I, at the beginning of the book, I like thought about it, but then I was like, nah, if I don't want to read this, then I have failed, right?
Mm,
I am my own audience. I mean, writing is a mirror, right?
right.
You write unless you're being paid for other work, which I have before in the past. You write what you want to see. It's a reflection of you.
Hmm. That
Hmm.
is that is very, very true, Rachel. And that actually kind of leads into the next set of questions, which I'm actually going to tie back to your previous roles as a game writer and narrative designer. So, in working in those two industries, has it helped you gain an idea of like how to approach your writing? So, can you go in detail, your roles in those two jobs and how they've helped you in your own personal writing?
Yeah, sure. I was a story writer, a narrative designer for an app game that a pirate merge adventure. It and I was hired on as also a consultant to check the historical accuracy of this game. Because my other, I wouldn't say expertise, but I have at least as much knowledge as an educated layman. My other area of interest is the golden age era of piracy, right? And the three different waves of piracy, Caribbean piracy in Pacific,
Mm-hmm.
of the 1700s and of the 16 and 1700s. And so I was hired on to help with that. When I was working with the narrative designers and I was creating dialogue, it was mostly very dialogue focused. They don't,
Mm-hmm.
it's writing a storyboard is different from writing a novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
With a novel, you can take your time, you can stop to smell the roses. Well, with a storyboard or with a game, those roses are planned out. And unless the player is going to go to those roses for a certain thing, they're going to be background, right?
Right.
And they're not expected to be interacted with in the same way. And I think that's what helped me in my own writing because it showed me, okay, I can get a little florid. I'm not going to say purple prosy, but I can get very vivid with my descriptions and kind of
Mm-hmm.
lose myself. And I think working in that environment helped me to gain a punch to at least some of my dialogue. I am still working on it, of course. I am not uh infallible, as none of us are, but I believe that it helped me to fix my own writing in certain ways or improve it, honestly. In other ways, it taught me there is a difference between writing for work and writing for pleasure.
Yes.
And a lot of writers can't really separate that. I think that's why, and to bring it back uh, to your golden age of writing, if I may,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why a lot of aspiring writers who want to write for pay use AI.
Yes.
I do not believe that AI is. I believe that AI is correct in certain ways, but not for the pleasure of writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as an artist, I mourn those jobs lost, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But but these jobs were writing for pay, right?
Mm-hmm.
I working in the industry and working as a writer, I had to remember I am writing for myself. So when I
Yes.
was let go, like, it was less devastating than you'd imagine because I put something of myself in my work, but it wasn't as much as I put in my novel. And so
100%.
learning that separation is something I will cherish, you know?
Absolutely, 100%. And then, of course, going back to, understanding the audience, what I've always found very interesting is the readership as well. How do we know our readership? And this is why I want to hear your thoughts on Rachel, because I I don't have a lot of experience, with a lot of, spice or erotic authors that have been on the show, but they have talked about when it comes to the readership for those type of books, there have been books that have crossed the line into categories that should not necessarily be, or may not categories, readership that don't necessarily need, heavy amounts of spice. And for those who know what I'm talking about, it's the YA genre. The YA
Yeah, of
genre is
course.
notorious
Yeah.
to have a little bit more spice than it needs to be. So for you, Rachel, did you already know from the get-go that your book was going to be geared towards a more adult audience?
Yes. I would consider myself, if you've ever heard, the problem with YA is that there should be YA and new adults, right?
Yes,
There
noodle is
should
another
there
important
should
genre.
be there should be new adults. Although it's not widely adopted. Because young
Mm,
adults, like when you are a teenager and you're feeling those feelings, like you do need some representation, but I understand the trepidation of other authors to uh speak about spice in that space
right.
because your main readership is eighth grade and up, right?
Mm,
Or sixth grade and up. Like, I read young adult novels in grade school, right?
right.
And so for me, I knew that I was writing for an adult audience because I am an adult now.
Mm,
I am 29. I'm almost 30. I have lived in the adult world for almost 10 years, and I've been far enough away from being a teenager that I can't really speak to that experience anymore. I could try, I could mimic it,
mhm.
but it wouldn't, for my first novel, I wanted to be as true to myself as possible. So I am an adult. I wrote for an adult, you know?
That's very, very true. And another thing that one person I did have on the show earlier this month said, YA is not a genre, it's a marketing area. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people tend to sometimes forget. Same thing like new adult, middle grade, adult fiction. Those are
Hmm.
not genres, those are marketing
Marketing terms. Yeah.
categories. So it is very interesting. And you're absolutely right. We are ourselves, you and I are both almost like around the same age. Like we know the books we've read growing up, we hold them dear, but they're not the ones that we enjoy now as adults.
Hmm.
We see them in a different perspective and a different light, and we have different tastes. Therefore, our writing is going to reflect our current interests and stuff like that, which shows our growth. We could write for a younger audience to try to reminisce that nostalgia, but at the end of the day, we would feel more comfortable writing in our preferred genre, or rather for our preferred audience, which leads into another question, which is individuality and the stories we grew up with. So, for you, Rachel, how have you been able to balance the two in the sense that you want to show your individuality through your first novel, but with keeping in mind the stories that you've grown up with, the types of books that this will be compared to, as well as the authors that you've loved growing up?
Well, I mean, good writers, uh, bad writers imitate, good writers steal. If I am,
Mhm.
if I am
Yes.
remembering the gist of the quote correctly,
Hmm.
forgive my paraphrasing. But you cannot divorce yourself from your inspirations. I
Hmm.
grew up with the mythic qualities of C.S. Lewis, of J.J.R. Tolkien. I grew up in YA fantasy like Inkheart. Um, I remember just trolling my local bookshelf for Tales of the Fae and Pirates, and uh, having that guide my studies later in life, right?
Hmm.
Like, as a writer, you cannot stop learning, you have to do your research, you have to speak to other people, and that will influence you, right? There is I do not believe that the personal and uh the the conventions of the genre, as you put it before,
Mhm.
um should be so divorced.
Right.
You can make your own points, but um they're your own, right? Even if you're following the skin. And same goes with influence, right?
Mhm.
I Your style is a mishmash of all of the writers that you read before and the ones that you admired plus your own. And to It's not stealing, it's borrowing, right?
Right.
And I think it's okay. Like, I don't really see a separation in my own style uh from, you know, Octavia Butler to Ray Bradbury to uh excuse me, oof, Amal El Mohir.
Mhm.
All of these authors wrote stories that have deeply affected me and will in turn affect my writing. I do not know where I would make that cut,
Mhm.
right? And I think you can't. Again, like I said, it's like life. You can't divorce yourself from your experiences. I do believe that young writers and first-time writers should make strides to cultivate their own styles using these people as inspiration. However, um it's something you can't discount, so use that and channel it into your own experience.
Absolutely, 100%. And, I 100% agree. As writers, we can't divorce the stuff that we've grown up with, but we also can't imitate or replicate because we don't know how to write like those. Even though some would say,
Mhm.
oh, this reads just like Tolkien or this reads like Martin. Well, that's a nice compliment, but we're not trying to be like those authors. We're not trying to
Mhm.
imitate them because there's no way we can be the next so and so. And of course, that idea of, honing one's craft, that comes through not only just hard work on our own part, but also the people we network and collaborate with. So, Rachel, can you talk about your networking experience? And are there any people you would like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you on the way with your first book?
Well, I have unfortunately, because I had to move from my last place of residence. I lived in China for the
Mm-hmm.
past 5 years. I was in Shanghai, and a lot of the writer circles that I was in, I had to leave when coming back to the States. But I'm in a few writers' discords. I want to shout out you, of course, Gabe, for reconnecting me with
Mm-hmm.
a general writers circle. I'm in a new Discord. I haven't set aside a lot of time for marketing as I because I left China due to illness. I've been recovering and I've
Mm-hmm.
been trying to get back into the rhythm of writing.
Right.
So that is kind of fallen by the wayside, but I hope to reconnect with other people further down the line because writing, like you said, is a collaborative act.
Mm-hmm.
Your influences are also your collaborators, and no man is an island. So I hope that in the future I get the chance to reconnect that part of myself.
Absolutely. And as a little tangent, viewers and listeners, as Rachel said, that, besides her passion for writing, she's also, quite an expert on the golden age of piracy. So make sure to listen to our Anchor episode where we talk about the golden age of piracy, which I will link down below in the description of this video. And potentially down the road, I know I talked about this a few times on my server about doing collaborations with other authors. Potentially Rachel and I could, well, I'll have to talk with her in full, but I don't mind sharing this here. We could possibly be collaborating on a book that I started writing back in high school called I forgot the actual title, but the Caldwell Chronicles. That's the title.
Mhm.
It's about two pirate brothers. So you potentially see both of our names on that book. So you never know. You honestly never know. But this whole discussion of collaboration, and you gave us some really good points earlier, Rachel, about this
Mhm.
industry is you really have to be realistic about it. You have to understand that it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's not any of those things. And this kind of leads into the final question, which I would love to hear your thoughts on, which is a
Mhm.
very loaded question, which is this. Again, this is not an industry to get rich quickly. And in this industry, there are two paths: to be an author, to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the craft, the other is dedicated to marketing. And while some may be successful from their first draft or for their first story or their first series, that's not going to replicate for everyone else.
Mhm.
Again, not a get rich quick scheme. And it may be deflating for people to hear that there is no guarantee your book is going to be a financial success or a critical success. And that is okay. That is completely fine. So, Rachel, ultimately, the question is this: with everything you've learned thus far in your journey as an author, how would you help a fellow writer understand that, yes, there is no guarantee your book will be a success down the road, but that shouldn't stop you from honing your craft down the road?
Well, I mean, I would encourage them to look at their own favorite authors. For every person who got success with their first series, there are people like Brandon Sanderson who did not, right?
Hmm.
They were writing stories and stories and stories, and finally there was a breakthrough. I would encourage them to view writing for writing's sake. It, I do not place much track in the sacred, but I
Hmm.
would consider writing a sacred act.
Right.
It is influencing the world with just words, right? And I would hope that the young writer that I would metaphorically be speaking to would want that kind of power. It's wizardry in its own way.
Right.
And I think that's what drew me to it again at the beginning as a little girl wishing for worlds far away, you know? That is how
Absolutely.
you hone your craft. If you enjoy writing, if you cultivate your writing, you'll never be alone. And isn't that the best pitch I can ever give?
That is actually the best word of wisdom ever, Rachel, and a perfect ending to this incredible author's interview here on the show. So, thank you everyone for joining us here today. A huge thank you to my dear friend Rachel for making her official debut on YouTube, and we wish her the very best. Rachel, you said your book is on Inkit currently.
Yes.
Awesome. I will link that down below in the description of this video. And where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? Do you have a website people can check out?
Yes, I have a blog spot, rachelmreeves.blogspot.com. It is in my author bio that I have provided to Gabe. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Um, as well as I have on my website, I have directions to short pieces that I've published, and updates on my novel are forthcoming. Again, I have not really engaged with the marketing side of this whole thing.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I will link all that down below in the description of this video, as well as I mentioned earlier in the episode, Rachel and I's discussion of the golden age of piracy, which is on Anchor. So I will link that down below. And make sure, again, to like, comment, and subscribe. And again, thank you everyone for joining us for another amazing author interview, as well as my friend Rachel for coming on the show. I wish her the very best from one author to another. And until next time, there's the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, we'll see you soon.